This episode of Lex Out Loud is brought to you by my patrons, readers, and listeners. If you'd like to learn how to support this podcast, visit lexstarwalker.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 49 of Lex Out Loud, writing science fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. This show is a chronicle of my journey as a science fiction novelist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Welcome to Lex Out Loud. I'm Lex, and I'm out loud. Okay, that was pretty silly. So glad that you're tuning in today. Really happy to be back behind the mic and talking about writing, one of my favorite things to talk about. So far with season 3, I've been catching you up with what I've been doing over the hiatus since season 2. And so what I've been doing for the past few weeks and what I'm doing now. And today I want to start talking about the second book a little bit. So season 1 and 2, I was talking a lot about the first book, although I guess mainly it was season 2 I was talking about the first book. Season 1 was a lot of just talking about the world building for all these books. But I've started thinking about what I want to do with the next book. So, I'm in the process right now of editing the first book. And originally, I was thinking that I would be editing the first book and writing the next book at the same time. I thought, each day I'd take a few hours to work on the first draft of the new book, and then take a few hours to edit the first book. And, that was kind of the plan. But as I think I mentioned in a previous episode, I started editing the first book, and I've just been doing so well with the editing and making so much progress that I decided I would just focus on that for now, get that done as quickly as I can. And I'm actually going to do, I think, at least 2 editing passes before I send it off to alpha readers. And then, just by necessity, once I send it off to alpha readers, there's going to be some downtime while they're reading it and giving their feedback, where I'll just have to wait before I do the next edit. So I thought that would be an ideal time to start writing the first draft of the next book instead of trying to do it at the same time I'm editing. And then that way I can really devote all my time and energy to editing and get it done in a fraction of the time that it would have taken me if I was also writing the next book at the same time. It also gives me some more time to think about what I want to do with book 2. I think at this point I have a pretty good idea what I'm going to do, but and I'll talk about this today, but I'm still not 100% sure. And I think it may actually be a thing of where I really know what I want to do or what I should do, and I just haven't convinced myself yet. I'm still doubting whether that's what I should do, but that's what I'll be talking about today. So as often happens for me, one of the best times for me to think about ideas and think about a book that I want to write is when I'm out walking somewhere. There's something about the combination of doing something physical, but not something that requires any kind of concentration or thought, really. And also, seeing things, being somewhere new, seeing different things, it's mentally stimulating in a way for me, I guess. But I find that's when I often get a lot of my ideas, is when I'm out walking. Used to be I'd get a lot of ideas also while I'm driving, but I don't drive much these days, and certainly don't drive very far when I do. So yeah, it's mainly while I'm walking. and I've had to I've had to take my car in to have things done on it numerous times in the past year or so, which I've talked about on the show before. And I am lucky enough that I live in a small enough town that I can walk places if I have to. And so it's about an hour walk, I think, from my house to where I get my car worked on. So I was making that walk and thinking about, what am I going to do with the next book? And I knew that I wanted to use some of the same characters that I used in the first book. So I started out the first book with one main character named Tia, who was the first character I came up with. She was the point of view character for the book. And then just through the process of writing the book, I ended up creating a second character that ended up also being a main character, and her name is Minji. And so they were the two main characters of the first book. And the first book is almost entirely told from Tia's point of view. There is, as of now, as of this point in the revision process, there is one chapter from Minji's point of view toward the end of the book. But other than that, it's all from Tia's point of view. But they're definitely the two main characters that we see the most of, and they're the ones that the story's really about. So I knew, or I was pretty sure, that for the second book, I wanted them to also be main characters. And I was thinking maybe what I would do is give Minji more points of view than she had in the first book. Maybe make it more of a 50-50 split. So, half from Tia's point of view, half from Minji's point of view. So I knew that going in that I wanted to do that because I like both the characters. I like how they work together. And I was pretty sure I wanted to see what comes next for them. And I knew I wanted it to take place in the same city that the first story took place in. But other than that, I wasn't sure. So I was on this walk, just kind of brainstorming ideas of, where are these characters at? What could I do next? What comes next kind of things. Those were the questions I was asking myself. And it's kind of funny when I started brainstorming, trying to just come up with some ideas, pretty quickly on this walk, I'd say within the first 10 or 15 minutes, I ended up coming up with two ideas that I really liked. However, the funny part about that is when I thought about each of those ideas, I quickly realized that neither one of them, although I liked both the ideas and I thought they could both make good books, neither one of them were really well suited for the next book. They would both be great for a future book, but not for the second book. So that was kind of funny. I'm like trying to think of what I want to do with the next book. And I come up with two ideas I really like, but neither one of them really fit for the next book, although they would fit for later books in the series. So the first idea I had, we'll call it idea A, would work really well for maybe book 3 or 4 in the series, but not for the second book. And then the second idea I had, we'll call it idea B, would work really well for an even later book in the series. So that one I don't even think would be good for, the third book. The thing with idea B is that it takes place in a different part of the solar system. So the first book and the second book take place on a city-sized cylinder, a city-sized space station in orbit of Earth, in geostationary orbit of Earth. And the idea for idea B would take place on a different cylinder in a different city, not in orbit of Earth, somewhere else in the solar system. So that's why that's an idea I want to put off for quite a while, because as you know, if you've listened to the first season of the show, I spent a lot of time working on this city, and I want to get more use out of it before I go move somewhere else. So I'd like to write at least a few books set in this city before I need to go create a whole different city. also the idea for idea B, in addition to taking place somewhere else in the solar system, it's also, just by the nature of what the idea is something that would take place quite a bit in the future from where book one ended. Specifically, it would be farther in T and Minji's careers that the events would happen. So if I did do this for book two, not only would I be going elsewhere in the story or in the solar system, but I would also need to advance quite a few years into the future. And I feel like if I did that, I'd be missing a lot of opportunities of other stories I could tell that are more immediately after what happened in book one. So if I want to do the books in chronological order, which I do, I don't want to be jumping all over the place in the timeline. I don't want to do the story for idea B until I'm done with the city I'm currently using, and I'm ready to move on to something else, and not until I'm ready to advance the timeline, probably at least a decade or more. So I don't want to do that yet. Even though it's a great idea, I'm actually really excited about that idea. I think it'll be a really fun book to write, but it's just not the right thing for right now. But yeah, I thought it was really funny that I came up with two ideas I really liked. And the other idea A, I also really like. The thing with idea A is it would actually have a main character that is not Tia or Minji. It is a character that was introduced in the first book, but it was more of a kind of minor character in the first book. Would be the main character of that story. And also part of the idea for idea A is it might be a mystery. And although that's something I'm really excited to do and to try doing kind of a science fiction mystery kind of genre mashup thing, I have read a lot of mysteries in the past, but I have not read a mystery specifically very recently, and I've never tried to write one. So there's a whole toolbox full of tropes and techniques and approaches that one would use in writing a good mystery that I would need to learn and practice. So that's another reason I don't want to do that one right now. It's the wrong main character. And I'm really thinking it'd be fun to do it as a mystery. And although I would like to do that at some point, I don't want to do that now. I really, because that would probably, just like the first book, I spent, I think, over a year world building. I feel like to do that idea, I'd probably need to spend at least a few months just researching mysteries, reading mysteries, studying mysteries, practicing writing mysteries. So there'd be a lot of downtime before I could really get going on the first draft of that book. And at this point in my career, or lack of one, I don't want to spend that kind of time. I'd rather stick with what I know and be able to churn out another book fairly quickly, so I can have two books to work with instead of one, and just get this train rolling. So it's a great idea. It's a book I definitely want to write. Like I said, it could work for the third book or later, but yeah, not now. So like I said, right now I'm planning to use these two main characters from the first book as my main characters in the second book. I'm also considering another character from the first book, having them have a larger role in the second book. So I'll definitely have two main characters, possibly three, in the second book. And all of the characters that are in the first book will be there for the second book. But yeah, the three of them will have like main character status, two or three of them. There are two other characters other than these three from the first book that may have a larger role to play in the second book, that maybe like secondary characters. But I don't think that they will get to the point of being main characters. And one of those characters was kind of a secondary character in the first book, and is someone I could develop him some more and do some more with him or I'm sorry, I think I said the second book. He was a secondary character, maybe a tertiary character. I don't know. It depends where you draw that line. But he was one of the more prominent, kind of more minor characters in the first book. But I think he will take a larger role in the second book. And then the other character was a very tertiary character in the first book that, at least right now, I don't think we really even meet him till towards the end. Although I may, in a revision, I may introduce him sooner. But I could see using him more in the second book. But a lot is really going to decide on kind of where the story goes, which I don't totally know right now, and may not even know until I get into it, because I am going to approach this book a lot like I did the last one, and kind of find it as I go, kind of discover it as I go to a large degree. So kind of as a side note here, but it's still very relevant to what I'm talking about today, which is planning the second book, or I don't even know if it's really correct to say planning it, just more thinking about it. Planning it makes it sound much more maybe organized than it is. But something I've been thinking about and I've been wanting to play with, and I've been thinking about this kind of all along with these books, is playing with an idea that I at least got a long time ago from, I think, listening to the podcast from the romance genre. Now, I don't read a lot of romance novels these days. I mean, truthfully, I don't read any romance novels these days, although I have in the past. But I think the last time I read a genuine romance novel was probably in high school. I mean, it's been a long, long time, but I have read some. So I am getting this idea secondhand, like I said, from a podcast. I'm pretty sure it was Writing Excuses where I heard this discussed the first time. And the romance novels that I did read, they didn't do this. I didn't read multiple books in a series. I just read some romance novels here and there, but I didn't read multiple ones in the series, if I could talk. So anyway, I've heard of this thing that's done in romance novels sometimes when you have a series within the romance genre, and it goes something like this. And it's the way they use their characters. So let's say you have some romance series of novels. In the first book, in book one of the series, you have your two main characters. We'll call them character A and character B, who, of course, have a romance, because that's what romance novels do. So character A, character B are the main characters of the first book, and they have a romance. So, maybe they hate each other at the beginning, and by the end, they've fallen in love and all that romance stuff. However, in that book also, you have some other characters who are there who are maybe friends of characters A and B. We'll call them characters C, D, and F, just for example's sake, who are also in the book. Maybe character C and E are character A's friends, and maybe character D and F are character B's friends. So they're characters that are there in the story that the reader meets. They get to know them a little bit, but they're not the main characters. Characters A and B are the main characters. So then in the next book in the series, book 2, this book is now about two of those kind of minor characters that we met in the first book. So now in book 2, the main characters are, let's say, character C and character D from book 1. But now this book is about them and how they have a romance together. And they're the main characters of the second book. And, characters A and B from the first book are in the second book as well in a more minor role. Maybe they're giving advice to characters C and D about, how to successfully navigate this rocky romance that they're in. And also, again, in book 2, we still have characters E and F who were minor characters in book 1, and they're still minor characters in book 2. So then in book 3 in the series, I think you probably see where this is going. Now, book 3 is about characters E and F and how they have a romance. Characters A, B, C, and D are now minor characters in this book. And and so on and so on. And the series can just go on forever. Also, this is kind of simplified as we're going, in book 2, we might be adding some new characters that are minor characters. What letter am I on? Characters G and H maybe are introduced in book 2 as minor characters. And in book 3, 2 more characters are added. But that's kind of the idea. And the general idea here is in the first book, you have however many main characters you have, but then you have also some supporting characters who then have a larger role in the next book. And then, each book you're introducing more characters, but as you introduce a character in a given book, they're not the main character. But then they may be the main character in a future book. So what I like about this is, for one thing, you don't have to keep using the same main characters for every book. So, each book you can have different main characters. So it doesn't get stale in that way of, every book is about the same character or the same characters. But at the same time, you're also not introducing new main characters that the reader has never met before, other than, of course, the first book. So, if your second book has different main characters in the first book, they're characters that the reader met in the first book. And maybe they don't know them super well because they weren't main characters. They didn't have point of view chapters, but they met them in the first book. They know who they are. So it's a little bit less of a learning curve for the reader when they're a main character in the next book, because they already know something about them from the previous books. So kind of what you have here is you have a cast of characters or an ensemble, and each character gets their moment in the spotlight where they're the main character of a story in different books. And, I used romance as an example here because this is, when I learned about this concept, that's where it was described being used. But, I think this works with any series of stories where you have a cast of characters above and beyond just the point of view character of a given book. And when the same characters keep returning book after book, they don't have to be characters that are involved in a romance. And also, you don't have to follow this kind of formula of every book has 2 main characters and every book it's 2 different main characters. For instance, what I'm thinking is in my first book, I had my main character, Tia, who was the point of view character for the book, pretty much the whole book. And then I had another main character, Minji, who was there for most of it, but she wasn't a point of view character. And then I had some other characters. And then in book 2, Tia is still one of our main characters, but now Minji is also a main character and has a larger role and is now a full-blown point of view character and has, as many point of view chapters as Tia does, maybe, or close to it. So she has more of a role than she did in the first book. And then I may take this third character who actually, in the first book, it's one of the AIs in the station who is, a minor character in the first book that was there, and you meet this AI, but maybe in the second book now they're a main character. Maybe they have points of view, maybe not, but they have more of a role in the story. And then I don't know. I just think it's a really great way to approach it. It gives more continuity to the books than, if you have totally different characters each book, and the only thing that's linking them together is they're in the same setting and in the same time period. And also, again, thinking about the learning curve, which when you're talking about science fiction or fantasy, that's something to think about, is the learning curve that the reader has to deal with, because they have to learn this new setting as well as getting to know these characters. So in my mind, doing things to ease that learning curve for the reader is often a good thing to do. And so if I'm going to have a new point of view character in my second book, then it's a lot easier for the reader if it's a character they already somewhat know from the first book, as opposed to bringing in some new character they've never heard of or seen before and saying, oh, this is the main character of this book now. I also like it because from the writer's perspective, it keeps it fresh for me. I got to know Tia really well in the first book, and I like the character. I want to do more with her. And I got to know Minji pretty well in the first book, but I really am looking forward to doing more with her and getting to know her better and finding her voice more with her own points of view. So, if every book was just the same character from the same character's point of view, I could see that getting a little stale for me, getting a little old, getting a little boring. But using this approach, I can have new points of view characters every book and new characters that I'm focusing on more. But I'm not asking the reader to get to know all these completely new people every book. And I'm also not taking away the people that they already got to know and invested in a previous book and hopefully like. So they still get to see those characters, even if I'm bringing in new characters. So I feel like it's a win-win for the reader and a win-win for the writer if you're going to do a series, which is what I'm trying to do. So I've had this idea in the back of my mind ever since I started thinking about doing a science fiction series. So when I started the first book, I originally planned on only having one main point of view character, Tia. As I said, as I wrote it, this other character, Minji, that I'd come up with, became more and more part of the story and had more and more of an important role in the story as it developed, to the point where I now consider her a main character, and she even got her point of view chapter of her own towards the end of the book. I then have this AI character who's in the story quite a bit, but is probably more of a secondary character. With the second book, Tia and Minji will both be the main characters again, but Minji will have more point of view than she did in the first book. And then this AI, will be more of a main character. And I may even do some points of view for the AI. Right now, I'm leaning towards not doing that, but I may do something like I did with Minji in the first book, where maybe towards the end of the book, maybe the AI will get a point of view here or there, just, a few times. So I think this is a really great approach for a series where you want to have an ensemble of characters, because you can build out the cast a little bit each book, add some new characters each book, and you can have different main characters and different point of view characters in each book, all without forcing the reader to have to get to know a whole new cast of characters with every book. And you can bring back their favorites time after time. So right now, my thought and kind of my approach to this is that I won't ever introduce a point of view character in a book that the reader hasn't already met in a previous book. I mean, we'll see if I hold to that as time goes on, but right now that's what I'm thinking. Also, right here, I should point out that I personally make a distinction between point of view characters and main characters. All point of view characters are main characters. I don't personally do the thing where I'll introduce some minor or even throwaway character and give them a point of view. I only give points of views to main characters of the story, and not all the main characters have a point of view. And part of that is because me personally, as a reader, I think there's definitely such a thing as too many points of view characters in a story. And I think sometimes some writers or some stories go a little overboard with point of view characters, and they really have more than they need. And the story might be stronger without so many. And part of it's just me as a writer. I'm not that confident in my ability to be able to present 6 different point of view characters in a given book and have them all have their own distinct voice and all of that. So I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. I'd rather stick with what I feel comfortable with as far as what I feel like I can do. So that's kind of why I try to limit it. But kind of my philosophy, at least for these books, is, I won't have a secondary character or a minor character or some throwaway character like the janitor in a hallway ever have a point of view. The only characters that will have points of view are main characters, and not all of the main characters will have a point of view. For instance, with the first book, the only reason that Minji gets a point of view chapter, I really didn't want to give her one. I wanted the whole book to just be from Tia's point of view. I just wanted to have one point of view. The only reason she gets one is because there was a chapter that I wanted to have in the book that it was impossible to do without doing it from Minji's point of view. Or someone other than Tia's. It was something that Tia wasn't there for. There's no way it could be from her point of view. It had to be from someone else's. And it was something I really felt had to be in the story. And the story would have suffered without it. And that's the only reason. And it was only one chapter. So, I tried everything I could think of first before I said, okay, I'm going to add another point of view to this. Even though the point of view I added was a major character who's there Minji is in most of the chapters of the book. And definitely most of the, important things that happen plot-wise, she's there for it. So she's a very important character. And even so, I only gave her a point of view because I had no choice. So I'm not saying that's what other people should do or that's what other people have to do. I'm not saying if you read some book and some random point of view character comes out of nowhere for one scene and then you never see him again. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that's my approach for the series and just kind of my philosophy going into it and my reasons for why I'm doing it that way. Other people can do what they want. And, I've definitely read books with lots of point of view that were great books. Perfect example is The Wheel of Time. I don't even know how many point of view characters exist in that series. There are so many, and it's fantastic. And I don't think for a minute that any of those points of view were a mistake. Although I will say that I don't think Robert Jordan ever had a throwaway point of view. And I could be wrong. I could be wrong about that, but I don't recall there ever being a point of view from one character and they never get another point of view. He did a lot of taking what seemed to be just very tertiary characters and making them eventually become main characters and point of view characters. So even sometimes when it might seem like, oh, this is some throwaway character that I'm getting a point of view from, you would get more points of view from them later in the series and they would end up being a pretty major character to the story overall. But different people have different approaches. So I'm not trying to say that this is the best way or anything like that. It's just what I've decided to do for these stories. So my approach in thinking about, what am I going to do with the second book is I started out thinking about my main characters and thinking about what their arcs, their personal character arcs would be in the book. Because like I said, I want these books to be very character focused. So before I even started thinking about a quote plot for the book, I started with, okay, here's my main characters. Here's where they end up at the end of the first book. So this is where this is their arc from the first book. Here's where they are now. What do I want to do with them for the second book? What is their arc? What does each of these characters have to learn, or what are they trying to accomplish? What do they want? Things like that. And that was the first step, is deciding what the character arcs for my three main characters would be. And that was actually pretty easy to come up with. I came up with all that for all three characters pretty much. There were some things, some details to flesh out later, but I came up with the broad strokes of those three character arcs on this one, hour-long walk. It was pretty easy because I knew the characters so well from the first book, and I knew kind of their arc from the first book. It was pretty easy to look at where they were now and where they were headed, and to kind of figure out what their arc would be for the second book. So once I had that, which again, I had pretty quickly, I started thinking about a situation for the second book, because I felt like, I need something else. Yes, I have a character arc for each of my three main characters, but that's not enough. Like, I need some kind of overarching situation that all three of them are going to have to deal with and hopefully have to work together to deal with whatever the situation is. So pretty quickly, I came up with one idea I liked. And it was actually one of the reasons I really like it is it's actually a consequence of what happened at the end of the first book. And it specifically involves one of the three main characters. And it's a direct consequence of what happened at the end of the first book. I thought, well, this thing happened at the end of the first book, and I could see that having consequences that are going to really affect this one main character and will also affect the other two characters because they'll be trying to help out the character that's dealing with these consequences. So right away, that was kind of, I guess, a plot you could say for the book, but I was thinking that it wasn't, quote, big enough. It wasn't flashy enough. It wasn't exciting enough. So I thought, well, maybe this would be a good subplot for this book. So I have 3 character arcs, and now I have this subplot that directly involves the one character, but will also, by relationship, involve the other 2. But it's a subplot. I still need a big, flashy, exciting main plot, or I don't want it to sound like I'm plotting or, like artificially creating this plot that I'm going to try to force my characters into. That's not what I mean by a plot. I mean the situation, the conflict that the characters are going to have to deal with, because that's how I'm approaching these books. I don't sit there and create a plot or outline a plot beginning, middle, end like I did my first novel. Just to me these days that seems very artificial. And I feel like when I read a book or I watch a movie or a TV show, like I can point out the ones that do that because they just always seem really contrived and just everything's orchestrated. And when you start picking things apart, there are all these things that really don't make sense. Like, why did the character really do that? Why did the character really say that? Doesn't make sense. It's like, oh, well, because the writer wanted this thing to happen. And in order for that to happen, the character had to do this, even though it didn't make sense. Which I'm not saying everyone who, quote, plots that's how their stories end up. But there do seem to be a lot of stories out there that seem like that. So, to me, it seems like if I have well-developed characters and instead I set up a situation with inherent conflict that I put them in, and then I kind of discovery write how they deal with that and see where that takes me, I'm going to avoid a lot of that stuff because everything that happens, I'm not, I don't have this outline of a plot that I'm trying to shoehorn my characters into. Instead, my characters are in a situation and I'm asking, how would this character react to what just happened, and seeing where that takes me. So I feel like by doing that, I avoid that kind of contrived thing because I don't have an endpoint I'm trying to get to. I'm letting the characters guide the story wherever it goes, if that makes sense. So like I said, I had an idea for a situation to put at least one character in that would also involve the other 2, but I felt like it wasn't Hollywood enough. It wasn't big and flashy enough. I needed something more. So I kept thinking about that, trying to come up with this big, exciting, situation to put everybody into. And it just kept kind of going in circles and not coming up with anything I liked. And I noticed here, I'm kind of a little hesitant to even share this because I feel like I'm showing, I'm divulging too much. But I don't know. The whole point of this show is to try to help you out by sharing kind of what I go through. And so that's not going to work very well, I guess, if I'm not open about certain things. So it seemed to me that I'm kind of in a rut here when I'm trying to think of this, what's this big, God, I don't want to say plot. I always want to say plot, but I don't because that gives the wrong idea of what I'm doing. What's this big situation? What's this inciting incident that I want to happen that's going to drive my story and give my characters something to be in conflict with, give them a problem they have to solve or an obstacle they have to overcome? Like, what is this thing? And all my ideas were basically disaster scenarios. And it's like, I'm thinking, obviously, I've watched way too many movies. I've watched way too many TV shows. Where, I mean, that's what they all are these days, especially movies. You know, it's all just one disaster scenario after another. And I'm like, is this all I have? Is this all I can do? Are my books just going to be like, oh, every book is some new disaster happens to these poor people living in space? It's like, is that really the only source of conflict or interesting situations that I can come up with? You know, is all these different disaster scenarios? So that was bothering me. So I was trying to get outside of that box and come up with something that wasn't a disaster scenario. And by the way, I had the same problem when I was trying to come up with the beginning situation for my first novel. Was every idea I had was some kind of disaster scenario. And honestly, you could probably argue that what I ended up going with for the first book was in a way its own kind of disaster scenario, but it wasn't, you know, one of the obvious things like the station's hit by a meteor or something blows up or something like that. It was a little removed, but it was still in a way sort of a disaster scenario in a way. So in a way, I never really got totally away from that. So I was trying to think of other things. And then the next thing, which is, again, just showing my influences, everything that I came up with that wasn't a disaster scenario was something involving crime, either involving like a murderer or, you know, a terrorist or something like that. And again, I'm like, my God, I need to quit watching movies, which actually I haven't watched many movies in recent years, but I guess all the ones I've watched already are still in there. So I was getting really frustrated because I felt like every idea I came up with was either some kind of disaster or some kind of crime related thing. And the first book was, hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler, but was kind of a crime related thing. So I didn't want to do that with the second book, especially because, as I said, I had this idea on the back burner of doing this kind of mystery story in the future, which also would be a crime related thing. And like, I don't want people to think that I'm writing like space crime novels because that's not what I want to do. Like, I don't want to get stuck in that category of like, oh, every book I write has to be some kind of space crime novel, because I don't even like watching that kind of stuff or reading that kind of stuff. Like, I certainly don't want to write it. But that's like every idea I came up with, it seemed like it was one of those two things. It was driving me nuts. So I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going in circles here. I'm not getting anywhere. So let's put that on the back burner and let's go back to the most important part of this story, which is the characters. And maybe if I do some more work on my characters and I get to know my characters better, maybe that'll help shake loose something that's not so derivative seeming and just like I'm doing a Hollywood movie. So I have these worksheets that I've developed that I started with something I got online, and it was a great idea in concept, but the application of it was not working for me. So I redid it. But it's basically kind of a questionnaire that you fill out for your main characters. And it helps you kind of flesh out, you know, who this person is as a person, you know, not just like what they look like. I mean, it has that, but who they are as a person, what's important to them, you know, what are their goals in life? What do they want? What kind of holds them back? What keeps them from realizing their full potential? You know, what are they afraid of? What ways do they underestimate themselves? Things like that. Any, you know, internal conflicts they might be struggling with. And so it's just a series of questions that ask you questions about the character, and you just answer these questions and fill out this questionnaire. So I decided that I would do that for my three main characters just to see if that would help me out. And another thing that it does is these sheets kind of focus in, and this is a lot of the stuff that I added myself, is it focuses in on the relationships between the different characters and how they relate to one another. So as I worked on these worksheets for my three characters, I realized that I had a lot going on with these three characters, with their individual arcs and their relationships with one another, and how they all kind of tied into this one situation that I already had in mind that I didn't think was big enough, that I thought was more kind of subplot material. Once I filled out these questionnaires, I realized I had a lot more going on there than I realized. So again, I began to think that maybe my thinking and my approach here is too influenced by what I see all the time on TV and in the movies, and in even books that I read, because a lot of books do these kinds of things too. And, I'm always saying I want to do more character-focused stuff anyway. So maybe I don't need some big external plot or conflict or situation to drive this book. Maybe I have enough established now with these characters and with this setting that, as long as I keep it interesting enough and as long as I write it well enough, maybe this quote subplot idea I have, which does, directly involve the characters, will be enough of a situation or a source of conflict or a plot, if you will, to make up, whatever else is needed other than just what the individual character arcs provide. So more and more I'm leaning this way. And, it's been weeks now that I've been thinking about this, and I still haven't come up with something else that I really like. So, I am giving myself some more time while I edit the first book before I seriously start writing the second book. Maybe I'll come up with another idea in that time to throw into it. But right now, if that doesn't happen, I think that's how I'm going to approach this book, and I'll just start writing it and see how it goes. There's always the possibility that some other thing will develop as I'm writing the book. I mean, that's kind of what happened with the first one. When I started that one, I kind of felt like I didn't have enough of a quote plot to make a novel, but as I started going, things filled in, and I think I do now. So that could happen again. But as it stands, even if I don't come up with some other idea to throw into this, I do think I have enough material for a book. Again, as long as I keep it interesting and as long as I write it well. And I guess really deep down, that's probably what's holding me back and what's making me want to find some big flashy Hollywood thing, is the fear that I won't be able to write it well enough for this kind of more character-focused story to really carry through a novel and keep a reader engaged. So yeah, I think ultimately it will come down to how invested is the reader in these characters and how well do I tell the story. I think if the reader's really invested in the characters and I tell the story well, I think it'll be a great book. Thinking about books that I read and that I enjoy, or even TV shows or movies that I enjoy, a well-written story about characters that I'm invested in and that I care about can really be about anything, or it can be about nothing. And I will happily go along for the ride. For instance, I've talked with my wife before about how, I would have been happy with a Star Trek The Next Generation episode where they just did really mundane things the whole episode, where there was no, threat to the ship, or no crazy alien they had to deal with, or no crazy new planet they had to deal with, or no anomaly in space-time or anything like that, where it's just an average day on the Enterprise with just, everyday, character moments between characters and nothing crazy going on. And I would have been totally on board with that. I would have loved that episode because I really like those characters. And I felt like you could put those characters together and have them do something just totally boring and it would still be interesting. And I was always kind of sad that we never got episodes like that. And I've heard people say things like that before. Like I think I remember someone in the Discord talking about the late, I was going to say latest, but I guess it is also the late live action Cowboy Bebop show, where they were talking about how, they just wanted to see like an average day in these people's lives and kind of what they did on just a normal day without some crazy plot related thing going on. And you will hear people say this about, shows or books or whatever that they really like. That's like, oh man, I just kind of want to see a normal day for these characters. And, to me, that's a sign of really good characters and really good writing when you hear those kinds of comments. So I just don't know if my characters are that good and my writing is at that level or not. But, hopefully with a lot of editing and revising and the help of, a professional editor, I can get it there. So as far as, what else I feel like I have to do before I start writing the first draft for the second book is some more character development. I feel like you can always do more character development. I don't care how developed my characters are. I can always come up with more, add more layers to that onion. So I would definitely like to do more character development. And also, as I think I've mentioned before on the show, I very much consider my city to be a character in the story. And so I want to develop that too. I mean, yes, I spent over a year world building the setting, which by the setting, I mean the entire solar system, not just this one space station. But I spent a lot of time on just this one space station. But I would like to take this opportunity between books to flesh it out even more, add some new locations that I can feature in this new book so we can see places that we didn't see in the first book. So that may involve some more research and definitely some more world building. So yeah, character development, maybe some research, definitely some more world building. But yeah, I'm not doing an outline. I'm not plotting or making a plot or anything. I'm not going to do any of that. And you can refer to previous episodes if you're a new listener. I've talked about that a lot. And also my recent series on my blog is about how my approach as a writer has changed since my first novel. And my first novel, I very much, everything was outlined, the plot, everything was planned ahead of time. And I just did not enjoy writing it nearly as much as I did this last book, especially when you talk about the last half of the book. And, I think there is a real risk of contrivance when you plot like that. And which is not to say that every writer that writes contrived stories. I'm sure it's like everything else in writing. It's all about the execution and how well you do it. But it is something if you don't do it well, if you don't do it masterfully, it can seem contrived and it can seem too convenient. And, it's amazing how many times in something that's otherwise very well written, I will see a character do something or say something completely out of character because it's what the plot demands. It's a common joke with my wife. We'll be watching some TV show or something and she'll be like, why did that character just do that? That doesn't make any sense. And I'll be like, the plot demanded it, or how did that character not get killed there? It doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, they have plot armor, obviously, and that's it. It's a thing. We have those jokes because it's a thing that happens, unfortunately, all too often. And, I'm sure taking a more discovery approach, there are definitely pitfalls there as well. One of them that I've found that I talked about in the last episode or not the last episode, I think it was the episode before that, the one about editing, is that you do have a bit more work when it comes to the editing when you discovery write, because everything doesn't always fit together perfectly the first time around because you're making it up as you go. So there's more things potentially that you have to fix in later revisions. So, I'm definitely not saying that there's a best way or a better way or anything like that, but just for me personally, this is the way to go. And I have a lot more fun with it, approaching it this way. But yeah, it'll be yet another adventure, figuring out what this book is going to be about, discovering what this book is going to be about. And I am looking forward to it. But for now, my focus is definitely on editing the first book and getting it polished to the point that I'm comfortable sending it out to alpha readers, workshopping it with the writing group. And then, while I'm doing that, I can be writing the first draft. And Brandon Sanderson said, and I think it was one of his lectures that I watched recently, that he usually figures it'll take about 6 months to get feedback from the alpha readers, which is how long it took me to write the first draft of this book. So that'll be when I write the next book, is while I'm waiting for that. And then, I can let that sit while I finish the next few drafts of the first book and then send it out to beta readers. And then while I'm waiting for feedback from beta readers, which I guess would be another 6 months maybe. Well, no, it'd probably be less because part of the alpha reading is the writing group, and that's what's really going to slow things down. But beta readers, it's probably at least going to be a month or two before they all get it back to me. So during that time, I can start editing the second book. So yeah, that's the plan. So that's what I'm doing. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm coming from. Hopefully it makes sense to you. And really excited to see where this takes me. So if you have any comments or questions, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, keep up with what I'm up to. And you can call my voicemail, 951-465-5391. Finally, you can join our community on Discord and hang out with myself and other writers and listeners of the show there. And you can find all those links and more in the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. And finally, if you would like to support this podcast, one great way you can do so is by becoming a patron. But there are also other great ways that you can help me out. And some of them won't even cost you anything other than a few minutes of your time. And you can find out about all of that at lexstarwalker.com/support. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And I wish you luck in your creative endeavors, whatever they may be. And until next time, keep writing.